Well, welcome back to The Agenda with your Missoula County Commissioners. I am Commissioner Dave Strohmeyer, and I am here today with my fellow commissioners and friends, Josh Slotnick and Juanita Vero. Today, we are delighted to be joined by Jordan Thompson with the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes. Welcome, Jordan.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here with y'all.
And before we get into the meat of this, maybe just tell us, Jordan, a little bit about yourself, your role with CSKT, and who you are.
Yeah, how you got there.
Yeah, well, I graduated from law school at University of Arizona with a certificate in Indigenous Peoples Law and Policy in 2011. So during my time in law school, I started doing some intern work at the CSKT legal department. So Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes, CSKT, I'm going to use those interchangeably. So I started working in the legal department in 2011, really focusing on water issues, energy issues. In 2013, we stood up Energy Keepers Incorporated, which was a tribal energy company. So I started working over there. Did a really cool externship in Washington, D.C. with a firm we contracted out there. So it was kind of fun to be a Georgetown lawyer for a year.
Wow.
Came back, went back to the legal department in 2015 and worked there for about 6 or 7 more years. And during that time, I really started getting into state politics. I became the state lobbyist for CSKT and did the legislative sessions in 2017, 19, and 21. And then additionally, I went back to get my MBA in American Indian Entrepreneurship at Gonzaga University in 2018. So I really like to think I use 3 lenses for my current role as acting tribal executive officer, which is kind of like the government's CEO. And I just really feel like I have a good lens to look through legally, politically, and economically. So I think those really come in handy in my current role.
Great. Which is? Describe your current role.
Oh, exactly. So the tribal executive officer, right now, we have a 10-member tribal council.
When I think of executive officer, it sounds like a nonprofit, but it's...
And the tribal council's all elected. Right?
All elected, yep. And so we have a 10-member tribal council elected from our membership. And so unlike probably a lot of places, our membership, we have about 5,000 members that live on the reservation and 3,000 that live off the reservation. So 8,000 tribal members total. The folks on reservation vote for our 10 elected representatives from 8 districts, 2 at-large positions, and then every other year we elect 5 representatives on council.
Can members...
you mean they term out?
No, they don't term out, but we have staggered terms. So every 2 years,
just
5
like
is
us, yeah.
Yeah, okay. The staggered term. So there's the number, the 10, it stays 10. They're just rotating.
Yep, they rotate, but regardless of where you live on the reservation, you vote for each council member.
That's like us.
So they're elected at large. Can tribal members who are not living on the reservation vote?
No, they can't right now, and yep, that's an issue we hear about, but right now they can't vote.
So does the structure with the chief executive officer kind of mirror a nonprofit in that the board of directors hires the executive director and then that person hires everybody else? In this case, the board hires you, and then are you responsible for all the other employees, the folks who work for the tribes?
Exactly. And
With the board being tribal council.
Correct.
You guys got it.
Yeah.
So we got our 10-member council. From the council themselves, they elect a chairman, vice chairman, treasurer, and secretary. And so that's how we get our elected officers from the council. And then the council appointed me as acting executive officer, and I've been doing that for about the past year and a half. So
that's a long time to be an interim.
Yep, but I enjoy it, learning a lot, and I sure enjoy working. I should mention I'm a tribal member too, so I really enjoy working for my tribe and doing the good work, and I feel like it really aligns well with kind of just what I value, and really enjoy the work.
The tribal government provides services, given they're a government, but they don't levy taxes. How does the tribal government generate the revenue necessary to provide services?
No, I love talking government with y'all, so we can just do this all day.
Dive in.
That's right. It might be a 3-part series.
So underneath my position, we have 4 directors. And then under the 4 directors, we have over 20 different departments, and they do everything from tribal education, forestry, natural resources, law and order.
Environmental health?
Yeah, pretty much everything any government does, we do it too, and then I say and beyond, because as you just mentioned, Josh, we don't have too great of an ability to levy taxes. We can over our own membership, but we really don't get into that too much, and so we raise less than 1% of our government monetary needs through any kind of tax generation, and so we have a huge reliance to generate revenues in other ways, and the main way the CSKT does that is through tribal corporations. And so I think a big difference than a lot of governments I'm familiar with with is the CSKT. We set up tribal corporations, and we can do that under federal law, under tribal law, and very rarely, but we could under state law set up corporate structure. And so we've done that in several instances. The one I'm most familiar with is Energy Keepers. And so we set that up in 2013 to take over what was then Kerr Dam. Now we call it SKQ, or Salish Ksanka Kalispay Dam. We purchased that in 2015, and that's been generating hydropower ever since. And so that's, again, our tribal council switches their hat from a board of elected officials to our shareholders' representative.
Board of directors.
And then they appoint a board of directors that then appoints the Energy Keepers CEO, and then they have a whole separate corporate structure underneath that.
Wow.
They also do that with S&K Gaming, S&K Electronics, S&K Technologies.
So all your kind of enterprising activities. But then who does like the services? When I'm thinking of services, what did you have in when you were
the
saying
provision
services?
of services? Like there are people working on natural resources or doing law enforcement.
I was like,
or
who does
like
the health department regulation, that
one
sort of
thing
thing?
that was just jumping to mind though, listening to you, was how often have we heard people say, "You need to run government like a business." And you guys are kind of doing that.
Or is it
But
that
you're not. They're providing different services.
Yeah. What are
I'm
the
doing air quotes
services
here.
you would provide?
So we've got a lot of ground to cover, and could I take a step back and provide some
Whatever you
context?
want, and whatever you want.
All right, because we're talking so much about contemporary operations of CSKT, but it's really, I think, important to understand how we got here, because there was a lot that's happened over the past 150, 200 years or so. And so if I could just take a minute to kind of catch us up.
Thank you. Yeah.
We like to say since time immemorial, since time began, three separate and distinct tribes, the Ksanka Band of Kootenai Indians. They're the most northern part of the tribes that make up the Confederation Kootenai tribes. And so they have a lot of sister bands that are up in Canada, over in Idaho, and so they're the southernmost band of Kootenai Indians. Traditionally, living around the lake were the Pend d'Oreille or Kalispel Indians, and so the Kalispels lived right around Flathead Lake, all the way down the Flathead River drainage system, all the way into what's now Spokane. And so a lot of the folks that are on the Kalispel tribe, which is in eastern Washington, are really close relatives to a lot of us on the Flathead Reservation. And then the Bitterroot Salish lived around this area and down south in the Bitterroot Valley. And then we also had bands on the other side of the Continental Divide that really stretched all the way to Yellowstone. Wow. And so we say we've been here since time immemorial. Our creation stories really put us in this place. And so when you listen to our creation stories, you can only tell those when the snow is on the ground. And so now is the time to do it. I'm not going to tell any here, but basically Coyote would cruise around with his relatives, fox and other animals, to really make the landscape ready for the people yet to come. And so there's just these incredible stories of the landscape and the mountains and the big draw area being created with Coyote, oftentimes getting into trouble with his other animal friends. And so it really tells how the landscape was created. Interestingly, when archaeologists go back and line up our creation stories with natural events that have happened, they say, well, it's clear you guys have been here since the last ice age, which was 12,000 years ago, but there's a lot of evidence that we were here even 40,000 years ago too. And for much of that time, things remained very much consistent, the same, and as I've been told by our elders, life was good. Things really experienced a rapid change, and a lot of big events happened in the 1600s with the introduction of horses, with the introduction of guns, and then with a lot more mobility, there was a lot more interaction, a lot more conflict, and a lot more disease. And so with the introduction of disease in the 1600s and 1700s, it's estimated that about 90% of our tribal people disappeared. When Lewis and Clark came through...
90%.
90%.
Incredible.
And so when you say decimated, that's a literal word.
What kind of disease? Do you know what disease we're talking about? Smallpox?
Yeah, in large part. There's probably others, but I think the one that I've been just most familiar with, just wiping out so many of our people, was smallpox. So Lewis and Clark came through 1805, and they were greeted by Salish Indians, and so there's a pretty dramatic portrait behind the state legislature in Helena that depicts that incredible scene. And so there's a great book, Expedition of Lewis and Clark, that our Salish Kalispay Culture Committee wrote. I'd recommend taking a look at that. Does a great telling of the history. I won't get into that now, but the first contact we had with non-Indians was in 1805. And then, as you guys know, just the spread of the United States west, and the settlers and people and gold and railroad and timber and agriculture just exploded the population and the migration out west. And so we signed the Hellgate Treaty in 1855. Sorry, this is taking a little bit longer, but
this is great
so
stuff,
great.
George.
I really also just want to mention, like, when we signed the Hellgate Treaty in 1855, the tribes here had no idea that
at Council Grove.
At Council Grove, yep, right outside of town. Yep.
Yeah.
It's a great place to go check out, and we have some great signage up there that kind of tells that story. What the tribes didn't know was several decades prior, the 1820s, 1830s, the United States was a young country really trying to get its foothold on how it was going to establish itself and how it was going to set itself up to expand and acquire more territory. And so Chief Justice John Marshall, it's known as the Marshall Trilogy, really set the framework for federal Indian law. And so there's some pretty big tenets that come out of the Marshall Trilogy. I'll just mention those briefly right now. But one is there's a trust relationship between the United States and tribes. 2, Congress has plenary or absolute authority over tribes. 3, treaties should be read as tribes would have understood them. And 4, tribes have inherent sovereignty. That goes back since the beginning of time. And so whatever hasn't been taken away through either a congressional act or a Supreme Court decision remains. And so really that's the framework of federal Indian law. And it's not law for Indians or even to benefit Indians, and so, but there are protections in there. And so even though when you read those decisions, it's very much, I'd say, based on racist notions of Indians. And when you look at other laws like the Jim Crow era laws or internment camp laws, those were eventually overturned. Federal Indian law is still a good precedent today. And so that's kind of on the negative side of things. On the positive side of things, the United States still treats its indigenous people better than, I'd say, 90% of the rest of the world. So there's that. So kind of going back to the Treaty of 1855, we signed the treaty. We thought we'd have actually 2 homelands in perpetuity for exclusive use and benefit. Through some technicalities and I'd say exactly. Less than honorable dealings. The Bitterroot Salish were removed from their homeland and forcibly removed up to the main reservation, which was called the Jocko, now the Flathead Indian Reservation.
When was that?
That was in the final folks moved up in 1891, and we have
October
a really
13th,
which is
That
why we
picture
have
of people
Bear
crossing
Track
the
Bridge
bridge.
recognizing that.
great
today.
celebration.
Yeah.
That's a great celebration, and just I just have to say, you guys do a really good job of really honoring our relationship. So I just want to say thank you for that. I'll try to wrap this up in the next minute or so, but 1855 was the treaty. And so federal Indian law and policy is like a pendulum. It swings over from tribes to remain independent, sovereign, and in control of their own destinies on one end of the pendulum. On the other side of the pendulum is Indians should just assimilate into mainstream society and just participate like everybody else in the American dream. And so when treaties were getting signed in the mid-1800s, it was really a tool for the United States to put tribes on different patches of land. And for us, it was part of our territory since time began. And so we ceded 22 million acres for the exclusive use and benefit of our 1.2 million acre Flathead Reservation now. Bitterroot Reservation's another story. And then at the end of the 1800s, we really got into the assimilation and allotment era. And so that's the era of the boarding schools, of the Court of Indian Offenses.
Jordan, I don't mean to interrupt, but could you describe what allotment is?
Sure. And so in the late 1800s, that plenary power was used. And so Congress, with its plenary power or absolute power over Indian affairs, said, you know what? I know we signed these treaties. I know they were supposed to be forever, but circumstances have changed. And so actually, to make more room for non-Indian settlement and to benefit the Indians. And the United States, along with European, always likes to throw in the benefit for the other people too. And they never asked us about it. We actually sent many delegations to say, please don't. But they said, it's actually going to benefit you to assimilate and become farmers. And so the policy at that time of the United States through the Dawes Act, or the General Allotment Act, was allotment in many instances. For individual reservations, they had to have an individual allotment act. And so when you look at old maps from the Flathead Reservation, say the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, you'll see the Flathead Reservation, and it was all green. And that indicates that was tribal land. More accurately, it's tribal trust land, because in that Marshall Trilogy, the Supreme Court said, well, actually, tribes, you don't actually own any land. The United States owns all that land through the doctrine of discovery. We discovered this, and so that's actually our land. But tribes do have the right of occupancy until we either extinguish that through purchase or conquest. And so that's why when we talk about trust land, it's held in trust by the United States government for the benefit of either the tribe itself, or after we get the allotment, which I'll get into in 1 second, you have trust land held in trust by the United States government for the benefit of an individual Indian. So the Allotment Act allotted each individual Indian on the reservation about 80 or 160 acres, depending on the land type. We have elders that say that was the worst thing they ever done to us. Absolutely, because before that, the tribe still lived a very much tribal-oriented life as a community, as families. We had herds of cattle, of pigs, of even buffalo up there.
They were managed communally.
Exactly.
And did people move around? Were they nomadic within a space?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And so traditionally, our tribal lifestyle was following seasons. And so in the early spring, we would celebrate the return of the Bitterroot. And so we'd go collect Bitterroot. And then some folks would go over the Continental Divide and hunt buffalo. And then we'd go back over to visit with relatives in Spokane. And then we'd make our way back, either hunt buffalo again or make winter camp. And that's really a time for storytelling and ceremonies in the winter. After we established the reservations and the Jesuits, that was a huge part of it too. They set up a mission there. But people were really encouraged to stay a lot more local and move around far less. Even though the Hellgate Treaty set up off-reservation hunting and fishing rights, really reserved those off-reservation hunting and fishing rights, so tribe members can go off-reservation to hunt and fish. We had instances where game wardens would.
But they had to get a permit to do that, right? And it was.
Yeah, I mean, not according to the terms of the treaty, but you'd have a lot of harassment by state game wardens, and so we have stories of people going off reservation and actually getting killed for exercising those treaty rights. And so while we reserved the right to actually practice it, was much different. And so a lot of our sacred sites on reservation became much more important because we travel off reservation less. But yeah, we would still hunt and fish on reservation to supplement gardening and that communal herd type lifestyle. In 1904, they passed the Flathead Allotment Act, and then in 1910, they actually implemented it where they allotted each individual Indian 80 or 160 acres, and then the excess lands or the extra lands were opened up to homesteading.
Did you see, the listeners aren't seeing
Extra.
The massive air quotes that Jordan is
That's very important.
putting around.
Yeah,
extra.
extra land. And what sort of proportion are we talking about extra?
As you guys are visualizing a map in your
Who chose
head.
what extra was or where extra was?
I think a lot of bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. And so, as I mentioned, we sent several delegations to really try to go lobby and say, please don't allot our homeland. But that wasn't listened to. They allotted it. And so after allotment, if you're looking at a reservation land status map, you're going to see three big colors. You're going to see green, which is tribal trust land held in trust by the United States for the benefit of tribes. And so they didn't allot all of it. So whatever the United States didn't allot, the tribes retained. Allotments to individual Indians, those are now orange on the map. And then everything else, if you ever just Google Flathead Indian Reservation, we're kind of a model for an allotted reservation. And you'll see just all of the cream-colored land. And so that's all of the homesteaded land, or what we call fee land that's held in fee simple status. In addition to that, there were state lands allocated to the state to really support with...
So I just want to be clear just for our listeners, too. That fee simple land means non-tribal members can buy that land?
Yes. Yep. And so really, as a tribal lawyer and now as an executive officer, it's... I call it trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. When the federal government allotted that land, to your earlier question, shortly thereafter, non-Indians outnumbered Indians on our own reservation.
Shortly thereafter. It didn't take long.
Like within 10 years.
Wow.
Within 10 years. And then by 1930, so 20 years after the implementation of the allotment, I think the tribes owned about 30% of the reservation land base.
Jordan, can you explain what the importance, the kind of abiding importance of the exterior boundaries of the reservation are? Because some folks might think that's a thing of the past now that it's been so chopped up and checkerboarded with non-Indian ownership of that land. What do those boundaries still mean today?
So when the tribes were first on the reservation, up until the early 1900s, I'd say late 1800s, tribal control was very much still prevalent. But towards the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, we started having a lot of federal control. The BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, really came in, started saying what we could do, what we couldn't do. Your kids got to go to boarding school. Your religion and culture is outlawed. You're not able to speak your language in schools. Just horrendous abuses in the schools, which is probably a story for another day. But up until 1934, the federal government really controlled so many components of life on the reservation. And then with the opening of the reservation and the fee lands, you get a lot of non-Indians and really under state law on those fee portions. In 1934, that pendulum swings the other way, and we have the Indian Reorganization Act. And so that was an act that really provided tools for tribal governments to organize in ways that the federal government could understand and interact with them easier. Before, we had the traditional chief system and sub-chiefs, and the way that system has been explained to me is if you really liked somebody and they listened to you, you'd follow them. And if you didn't like the way they led, you wouldn't. And so it was really very flexible and kind of a lot of freedom for families, communities, and bands to kind of organize how they wanted. In 1934, the traditional chiefs were still honored and recognized, but the CSKT adopted a constitution, which is how we have our current government set up right now with the 10-member council set up from 8 different districts, and it really lays out all of the powers and duties of our...
And the CSKT were like the first
Yep.
in Montana or in the nation to...
I heard that we were the first tribe in the country to organize under the IRA, the Indian Organization Act. And so, we really took the lead, and we like to pride ourselves on taking the lead in several areas and took the lead in reorganizing. And so that's how we have our current government today. I'm just going to fast forward really quick to the 1950s was the termination era. So the federal government was really intent on terminating that special relationship it has with tribes. But then we get the 60s and eventually the 70s, and Richard Nixon was really good for tribes and passed the Indian Self-Determination Act. And so that was an act that provides the ability for tribes to contract or compact for all of those federal programs. So up until 1970s, the federal government ran Indian health. They ran our Indian education. They ran our tribal forestry. And so all of those big federal type programs, today CSKT manages and operates. And so that was probably the hugest shift. I've gone to Indian law conferences and just visited with some of the old timers sitting next to me, and they say that was by far the most effective thing for Indian self-determination that the federal government has ever done.
What year was that?
1975.
Under Nixon.
Oh, wow.
So prior to 1974, the federal government was doing this work. Does that mean post-1974, the federal government pays tribes to do this work, or are you on your own to come up with revenue to do that work?
Yeah, so I think we're finally getting back to your guys' questions. But now we got the history, so my answers will make a little bit more sense. And so you're exactly right. For federal programs, so I like to throw forestry or Indian health. The federal government has a trust and treaty obligation to provide those services to us. Under the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, or ISDEA, that law provides the ability for the federal government to provide funds directly to tribes to do those federal functions. And so now CSKT operates all of those federal functions, and we have a BIA office, but it's kind of a little tiny corner office in the basement of the old complex. So a very small BIA presence. They still need to sign off on federal functions like leases and things like that, but for the most part, we do pretty much everything. Now, back to your question, we're very limited because the feds don't fund everything that we want to do. And so anything extra that really includes culture and language and taking care of our elders, that's up to us to figure out how to pay for.
And so you have to do that out of revenue from your businesses or from grants?
Both. We do both. And so we're pretty good at writing grants, and it's just a lot of staff people really rolling up their sleeves and doing that. But the other thing, as you just mentioned, is we do generate revenues through those businesses. And so those are so critical for our culture, our language, our elders, and a lot of our youth programs.
Jordan, let's go back just a bit in terms of tribal government and leadership structure. So talk to us a little bit about how the two culture committees fit into all of this and the councils of elders, because I think that's a common stumbling block for folks to understand just how these seemingly different pieces fit together in terms of tribal leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question and really interesting story there. And so I don't want to get my ears wrong, but I'm 99% sure it was in the 1970s. We had some tribal elders that were looking around and really thinking, man, we got to just start recording some of these stories. And so at least with the Salish Kalispé Culture Committee, or the SQCC, we had some people, and they just had a tape recorder, and they just invited elders to come, and they just said, hey, let's visit. And so they would just visit, and so they'd have these recordings of just tribal elders talking, a lot of times in the language, and just talking and telling stories. And that was really the genesis of our SQCC, our Salish Kalispé Culture Committee. And I don't even think they had much of a budget other than probably for the tape recorder and some volunteers at the beginning. Kootenai Culture Committee, I think they were established around the same time. And so fast forward 50 years, and they are both very robust departments in our tribal government. And so in those departments, they do a lot of consulting when there's federal projects or even tribal projects. They're out there really giving their observations, their knowledge about these areas. They go around all over Montana and beyond and record place names. They do a lot of cultural events so we can convey those stories not only to our kids but also just to adults and our older folks who just want to learn more and just connect too. And so through our culture committees, we have language apprentice programs, and we also have, and I think this is what you were kind of getting to, is our elders committees. And so we have two culture committees, the Kootenai Culture Committee and the Salish Kalispé Culture Committee, because Salish and Kalispé shared the same language, a lot of the same cultures and traditions, and so that was a natural alignment. And so each of our culture committees has a group of elders advisors, and so those advisors meet once a month, one up in Elmo, one down in St. Ignatius, and so tribal leaders, tribal departments, and then just folks that have questions, cultural questions, can go to those elders and just ask questions and get guidance. I really enjoy going to those meetings. I learn a lot. I go get guidance, and every now and then I get set straight, which I need, and I appreciate that. And so, yeah, just really great resources for our community and our tribes.
So, Jordan, Thanks. I know this from just chatting with you in other contexts, that food sovereignty, if we don't mind switching subjects, is important to you. What are you all doing around food sovereignty?
Yeah, we lost so much. Like when you look at what happened after allotment and how our community was before versus after, it just so fundamentally changed how we lived life, and then kind of everything that goes along with that. Our economy changed from just one of really reciprocity and relationship and caring for our community to now really being based in capitalism. We have, instead of communally held land, we have private property. Instead of communal food systems and really a reliance on fish and deer and elk and buffalo and our roots and berries, we became much, much more reliant on federal commodities. And so our food system changed, and as a result, our health started changing too. When the Scalihu, or the Salish people, describe themselves, they say, we're Scalihu. As I understand that comes from two words, skelts, which is the flesh or meat, and stulihu, which is the land. And so flesh of the land is literally who we are. Wow. And so as it's been told to me, when you're eating like the land, whether it's berries or the animals from that, and then you return to it, you're literally a part of that. Well, now we're getting, our commodity cheese or commodity bacon coming in from who knows where. And so even who we are as a people has changed. That's been noticed, especially in the past decade or so. Food sovereignty has been a really big topic for a lot of folks, tribal folks as well. And so at the end of the 2010s, we had a chairwoman who was highly invested in food sovereignty and a council that supported that. So they set up the food sovereignty team, and I was
This is Shelley Fine?
Yep, you got it. And so I was voluntold to be on the food sovereignty team, and so we were on a roll. We went to one conference, and then COVID hit. And so we thought, man, all of the wind in our sails was gone, and we're just going to have to sit this one out for who knows how long COVID's going to last. But interestingly, COVID came a lot of funding. And so CSKT got funding to do different things. One of the buckets the funding went to was food security. So council gave the food sovereignty team the food security bucket to go see what we could come up with to really promote food security on our reservation. We talked with our leadership, with our elders, community members, and just people in the food system that were familiar with it. And what we found is well over 90% of our food's coming from the outside in. We live in one of the best agricultural valleys that I'm aware of, and that is all getting shipped out, and then we're getting Food Services of America and those types of places bringing food in. The other thing is affordability, and so with our families, a lot of times they go to the fast food places or the Walmarts, and so it's just really not the most high-quality, nutritious food that is making up our current food system. So how do we deal with that? How do we start taking steps to rebuilding our food system? And so you were able to come visit our Food Sovereignty Center up at the old Kicking Horse Job Corps. And so that's been redesigned to really do a lot of things, including having our Food Sovereignty Center. We've got a wonderful staff, over 7 strong, and we have a lot of other workers through vocational rehab, those types of things. College interns, AmeriCorps folks going up there just to really build our skill set so we can start getting high quality food back out into our community. And so about 3 years ago, we started having a community garden network, and that's been pretty good. I think it's been a good step just to really start practicing growing high quality foods, getting our community interested and their skill set built up to start growing their own high quality foods. We started putting out food boxes of organic local produce. We're really partnering with Western Montana Growers Co-op and other local places to get high quality local foods out to our community. We started our Elders Soup program, and so that's one thing we're really proud of, where we deliver over 200 soups to over 200 elders twice a week. So and
you guys are growing the kind of feedstock for the soups.
Yep. So a lot of that's coming right from our very own gardens, and a lot of it includes deer, elk, and buffalo that we either hunt locally or get from our treaty reserved bison at Yellowstone.
And that's all prepared at the...
Yep, at
Kicking Horse?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
And so we have with the COVID funding, it was gutted after Job Corps left end of 2010s. That was totally gutted. So we rebuilt the cafeteria and kitchen, and it's got commercial grade equipment up there. And so we've got amazing cooks. Every time I go stop in there, they always make sure I leave smiling. And so, yeah, we just cook everything right there. And then we have some great folks that go out and deliver that. And so as you guys, I'm sure, know, it's more than just food. It's also just that visiting.
Contact.
Yep. And so now what we're really excited, I think we're off to a great start, but now it's getting into the growing. Like, how do we really grow our own food and put that into our own food system? And so to start, we're really looking at how do we start getting food for our local schools? How do we get it for our local businesses? How do we get that to our elders programs even more so? And just really any food that the tribal government is purchasing, how do we provide that and grow that ourselves? And then how do we really support our membership to build their own skill sets to do that as well?
So one thing that I've not kept my finger on the pulse of, but a few years ago I was hearing about, is the effort to get meat processing going on the reservation. Where is that at?
Yeah, we're coming around the corner on that. I think we're on target to have our own meat processing facility up by spring 2026.
Oh, wow. This spring.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's
too late. You are
yeah,
going.
All right, I'm on record. So spring, that's
okay. Spring 2026, everyone.
But
it's not a mobile unit. It's a
Yep, right outside of Ronan. It's going to be a USDA certified facility, and it was really important that not only did we have the ability to process local cattle and that sort of thing, but also wild game.
Yeah.
And so wild game has been a big issue, and hunting has been a big issue on the reservation. And so we've really taken, I'd say, great strides to really manage the big game up there, and part of that is getting them back into our food system. So we have our Natural Resources Department has hunting efforts, and our Food Sovereignty Department also has efforts to go out, do administrative hunts, and then take that meat and put it back into our food system, a lot of times through soups, a lot of times through meat distributions, and then that facility is going to be really helpful to just even provide more of that really high quality traditional meat to our community.
Wow, that's fantastic.
That's super great. I really hope I get to come up and talk some more with you on food sovereignty. That was an inspiring visit. So what are the other opportunities that we can work together?
We being Missoula County and CSKT.
No, not just Josh Slaughter.
That's fun too. I like hanging out with Jordan.
Well, you guys are all.
How can Missoula County collaborate more with CSKT?
Well, you guys have always been great in my time at CSKT. So I'd say we've got a great relationship to start with, but I'd say just the sky is the limit on what we're able to think about. I know that we do a great job already partnering for things like the Bear Tracks Bridge celebration. That's wonderful. I know there's a lot of opportunities to work with our culture committees to get signage around town for just places that are really significant to us there. And then, I think tribal council and you guys have a good relationship, and so that's really where the ideas come. I'm more of just how do we get those ideas into action. But like I said, I think you guys are well on your way, and we're already doing quite a bit of good stuff.
Well, one thing that we are exploring right now, and Jordan, you may be aware of this also, is there an opportunity for internships?
This
with
is
students
underway. This is underway.
This is happening.
With the college.
Yeah, I don't know if you heard about that at all, but yeah.
Yeah, that's exciting. I mean, we have just so many opportunities within our tribal government. We have over 1,400 jobs. We're the largest employer in Western Montana, so we've got plenty of opportunities, and then our business side of things even more so. And so one thing, though, that I'm always trying to explore different ideas is how do we start skill building and mentoring our younger tribal members into getting into these positions. And so I think that's a really wonderful start for you guys to be exploring that idea.
Yeah, we're excited about it.
So if you were to look out 5-10 years, and you name the vision that you and tribal council has right now, where do you see CSKT over a time horizon like that, economic development wise, moving portions of the reservation from fee to trust, you name it?
I was talking earlier about the different eras of kind of federal Indian law and policy, and right now a lot of folks say we're in the nation building era. And so what does that look like? A lot of people say we're in the nation rebuilding era because we had very successful nations. But what does it look like to really reinvigorate us as nations? And so I think it's always important to think about how we're going to be as self-sufficient as possible. And so how do we generate even more revenues? And so we've got some really exciting businesses, and we're always looking at opportunities to kind of further that. Land, I think that's another thing that we're talking about, is how do we really protect and manage our landscape in the best way possible. With the federal government, we have a lot of federal partnerships, and so that's one way to do it. I was kind of surprised after law school. You learn so much about the opportunity with federal government and tribes because that's who our trustee is, and so they have a trust responsibility, they have treaty obligations. Our kind of scope of our sovereignty is really defined and strengthened by our relationship with Congress, the executive, and the Supreme Court. But working actually on the ground, you start to see how much relationship there is with the state. And so over the past 10 years, I think our relationship with the state has, at least in my opinion, really strengthened. We've got really good relationships with the NRC, with FWP, with the administration, with just different efforts all over the place. And then locally, we've got 4 counties that intersect on the Flathead Reservation, and so I really appreciate coming to visit with y'all. And it's just exciting to think about how we can continue to strengthen those relationships to really get after the things that are important to all of us, like aquatic invasive species, keeping Flathead Lake clean, right? I mean, that's one of our biggest efforts is aquatic invasive species and keeping those little critters out of Flathead Lake. And so that's a total team effort. Back to your question, though. Colonization had a huge impact on us. When you look at sort of the charts for statistics in Indian country, you see, well, tribal people are kind of at the lower rung of education and socioeconomics and health and, kind of incarcerate all of those. But we just haven't been in this system for very long. Like 100 and some years is as long as we've been in it. So I think we're still kind of getting our footing. And then once we really have an opportunity to grow a nation build beyond that. So how do we get our people healthy? How do we get our food system healthy? How do we get our economy healthy? How do we get our lands healthy? How do we get our waters healthy? And those are all questions that are probably beyond my understanding today. But 10 years from now, if we could just be a lot healthier, and when I say we, I mean all of our relatives, us, the animals, the air, the water, the lands, all of it. And I hope
Jordan, that is a great vision.
Oh, good.
Compelling.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you wish that we would have asked you that we did not?
Yeah, I had a lot of fun, number one, but I was really prepared to talk a lot more about the exterior boundaries question, and then I kind of lost track of it. But just like, what is the significance of being within the exterior boundaries?
What is the significance
And so
of that?
even with like fee land being part of the reservation, there's still just so many kind of interplays that the tribe has with the counties and with the state and with Indians, non-member Indians, meaning Indians from other tribes, and then non-Indians. And so, like, who has jurisdiction over what? And for the most part, that's such a tough legal question with so much unpredictability. The Supreme Court has called itself schizophrenic when it comes to federal Indian law. I think that was actually Scalia that said it, federal Indian was schizophrenic. And so there's so many questions that are just really hard to know the answer to. And then even when you think you do, you take it up to the Supreme Court and they decide the other way. And so one thing that's been so beneficial is having cross-governmental agreements. And so with criminal jurisdiction, for instance, tribes don't have criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians, and state doesn't have criminal jurisdiction over Indians. And so how does that work on the current reservation where you've got 35,000 people? 30,000 people are non-Indians, 5,000 are Indians, and a lot of times you got Indians living with non-Indian families, and there's a dispute, and so who can arrest who? Well, we have a Public Law 280 state tribal cooperative agreement, and so that just really answers a lot of those questions. Same thing with hunting. That was another issue that kind of popped up. Like, who can hunt big game? Who can fish? Well, we solved that question by entering into another state tribal cooperative agreement called the Bird Hunting and Fishing Agreement. And so that really lays out who can do what on the reservation. And so maybe that's material for part 2 of our podcast series. But I just think that's really interesting because once you start understanding, well, I'm a non-Indian on a reservation, what does that mean for me?
What about like mortgages or home ownership or like or loans or can...
Yeah, I mean,
if you're...
Luckily, the tribes have our own bank. And so we're a lot more flexible with providing loans because the hard thing is with trust land, that's pretty tough to get somebody to take that as collateral because the United States isn't going to give it up. It's protected by the United States in trust. And so if I wanted to go to a regular bank and put up my trust land for collateral, a lot of times I'll say, no, thanks. You're going to have to find someplace else to go get a loan at.
And my understanding is that with allotments, allotted land that is held in trust, it could be highly fractionated with many owners, which I'm sure lending institutions would also
super complicated.
Wonder what do I do with this?
That population statistic you just tossed out is really powerful. 35,000 people, 30,000 non-native, 5,000 native on reservation land.
Yep.
I think that's a much larger disproportionate number of non-natives than a lot of people would imagine, especially folks who don't live here.
Interestingly enough, when I mentioned the land ownership by 1930, by 1930, the tribes owned about 30% of the reservation land base. Now, we own just under 70%. And so over the last 100 years, we've made enormous strides to purchase a lot of our reservation back. And we have to do that on the open market. So we just go look for willing sellers, and then we purchase. And then upon purchase...
And that's land that's owned by the tribes.
Yeah. Yep. And so we might have Joe Farmer saying, hey, I want to sell my 100-acre farm. And so he pulled it on the open market. And so the tribes will say, well, we budget money every year to purchase lands. And so we might decide that's one that we'd like to purchase. And so we'll purchase that in fee status. And then the federal government has a very lengthy fee to trust process that we go through to put that land back into trust.
You take that land and put it back into trust.
Yep. Well, we try to. We tried our best. And so it's a long, slow process.
That's a pretty successful run to go from 30% to 70%
and I think,
in 100 years.
Yeah, it's a little bit lower than that, but I am including, I think, the southern end of Flathead Lake. And so that's, but despite that, that's...
And these statistics, how do they compare to other reservations across our state?
Like I say, on my federal Indian class, we really use the Flathead Indian Reservation as sort of the model for allotment because it was so heavily allotted and there's such a big non-Indian population there. And so as far as I know, I think it's the heaviest allotted reservation in the West that I'm aware of.
I bet.
What's the value of, just with the scenario you painted earlier in terms of willing seller, the tribe purchasing and in fee that land, what's the value of then moving it into trust? Is it to not have to pay taxes?
I was going to do the same
or?
thing. Why not just hold it in fee yourself? Why put it into trust?
Yeah, so the big thing is taxes. And so the tribal government has to provide a lot of services to our people, to the landscape, to roads. And so we have to reserve as much money as we can for those governmental purposes. When we own land in fee, right now, we're paying a lot of money to other governments, like the counties. And
So if you own land in fee, do you pay property taxes?
Yeah, that was kind of an issue at the state legislature for a while. But right now, the way it works is if the tribes purchase a piece of fee property, there's a 5-year window where the state says we're not going to tax you for that 5 years. If the tribes don't get the land put into trust within the 5 years, then the state, through its counties, has the ability to tax that land.
Property taxes.
Yep. So after 5 years, the tribes are going to be paying property taxes on fee land.
Has it been taking that long to get to the fee to trust process?
In a lot of instances, it has. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
And again, why does it take so long?
It's just about a 20-step process, and so you got to go through the process and enter it into a certain system, have the feds check it, and if certain parts of the process don't get done by a certain amount of time, it's like you got to start back.
Is it designed to cause people to fail or not be successful? What?
I just think there's a lot of bureaucracy. And so we've worked with different secretaries of the Interior to try to really shorten that process. And I hope that we're getting better, but we've still got a ways to go to really make that a more streamlined process. And so, yeah, the big issue with putting those lands from fee into trust is the taxation and then jurisdiction. That's a little bit more complicated, but when it's federal trust land, held in trust for the tribe, jurisdiction's a lot cleaner when you're trying to exert your sovereignty or when you're trying to exert your ability to exclude or just things like that.
Sure.
One other footnote I will say, just because I said it a lot of times in my professional capacity, I'll use the word Indian, and I know a lot of the old timers use Indian, but it's also a term of art. So in federal Indian law, it's just kind of got like a certain legal meaning. And so in my personal life, I'll probably say Native or Salish or Kootenai, but when I'm talking federal Indian law, I will say Indian a lot.
That's an important distinction.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And I guess, before we close, can you share with us a good book or a nugget of wisdom you've come across recently? It doesn't have to be a book.
Yeah. Holy moly. I've just...
Music, song, podcast, poem, art piece.
Feel like I just got shot out of a washing machine or something because I just got done teaching federal Indian law at Gonzaga. And so class...
I saw your water bottle.
Yeah. So it was a great semester, but that's what I do for fun.
What age? Like, who are your students?
Law students at Gonzaga.
Wow.
And so
I was thinking undergrad, sorry.
I'm an adjunct professor over there, and so I do it all online. And so, after my day job, I've been teaching, and so that's been great. And so we just went through a pretty hefty-sized case book, just kind of reading all about federal Indian law. But the nugget I want to share with you and your listeners is I think one thing that I always like to remind folks, and it's been reminded me, this is by no means my idea, but I heard it once and I just repeat it every chance I get, that we're all treaty people. And so I've talked about the Hellgate Treaty today, and oftentimes when I talk about that, it seems like people think, well, that's an Indian, that's a tribal thing, but that's not true. That's really every American citizen thing, because American citizens' government signed treaties with tribal citizens' governments. And so we have probably over 400 treaties as United States citizens that we should be aware of. But I'd say particularly know the treaty in the area we all live in. So if you get a chance, I'd say just Google up the Hellgate Treaty and take a look at that, because I think that's just a good thing for all of us to know and read.
Yeah, especially for people who live here.
Yeah.
Man.
And Council Grove's right down the road, and so that's a great place to go visit.
Part of our valley, part of our county.
Well, thanks so much, Jordan.
No
This
kidding. This
fantastic.
was an incredible history lesson. Thank you, Jordan.
Well, that went by so quick.
I know, we got to have you back.
I think we might have to have you back. Yeah.
Well, that was great.
Thanks a lot.
Great visiting. Like I said, I always love visiting government. So,
Man, really appreciate you made the time to come see us.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to The Agenda. If you enjoy these conversations, it would mean a lot if you'd rate and review the show on whichever podcast app you use.
And if you know a friend who would like to keep up with what's happening in local government, be sure to recommend this podcast to them.
The Agenda with the Missoula County Commissioners is made possible with support from Missoula Community Access Television, better known as MCAT, and our staff in the Missoula County Communications Division.
If you have a question or a topic you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, email it to communications@missoulacounty.us.
To find out other ways to stay up to date with what's happening in Missoula County, go to missoula.co/county updates.
Thanks for listening.